Good afternoon. I am Sarita Henriksen, an associate professor at the Pedagogical University of Maputo in Mozambique. It's a great pleasure for me to be here and to share some of the insights on language and the issue of sustainability. The outline of my presentation is here in front of your eyes. I will be presenting a very brief background to the issue of sustainability. I will be talking about sustainability from the perspective of social linguistics. I will be talking about the connection between language and sustainable development goals, climate change and Mozambique, climate change and the global south at large. And then to finish my presentation, I will be revisiting a number of questions that I consider for reflection that you will take as takeaways, apologies for the redundancy, in order to help you reflect and consider the issue that I will be dealing with here. The main objective of my lecture, which is part of the PLUS Digital Key Topics lecture series, is to delve into the intersection between language and sustainability. While sustainability is often seen primarily through ecological and economic lenses, this lecture aims to broaden the perspective by emphasizing the critical role of language as a social phenomenon, deeply intertwined with society, culture, and economics as well. As we explore sustainability through the lenses of social linguistics, we will examine how language not only reflects but also shapes societal interactions and our understanding of sustainability. This presentation will connect the Sustainable Development Goals with linguistic diversity, highlighting how the inclusion of local, indigenous, minority languages is essential for effective environmental communication, awareness raising, education, and policy making. I'll also say that we will spotlight Mozambique and the Global South regions disproportionately, how they are disproportionately affected by climate change, where linguistic inclusivity can empower communities to actively participate in sustainable development efforts. We will also consider how collective action, which is informed by linguistically inclusive practices, is vital for addressing the global sustainability challenge. Lastly, this is a journey, I believe, which is aimed at understanding why language is a cornerstone in the pursuit of a sustainable future. So, while sustainability is often seen as an ecological problem, I argue here that it's also of concern to the social scientists and academics within the fields of social sciences and humanities, considering that sustainability is indeed a social issue as well. I decided to revisit Roshan, who claims that environmental problems are also social problems. Social work as a scientific area has increasingly assumed the importance of including environmental problems in social intervention. This close linkage to ecological issues is particularly relevant when addressing vulnerable communities. So in the same vein, Locke claims that no other concept has done more to shape contemporary understanding of the social, economic, and ecological interdependencies implicated in environmental change, and sustainability has become part of our collective common sense to a point that several scholars have reflected critically on its meaning and its importance as well. From this perspective, it's my view that social linguistics which is this branch of linguistics that deals with the relationship between language and culture or language and society, has a key role to play in understanding and addressing sustainability, climate change, and the issue of greenhouse gas emissions, especially bearing in mind that language is indeed a social phenomenon. Language is related to social class, there is no doubt about that, ethnicity, gender, territory, and to many other factors. Language is key to sustainability. It is intrinsically related to economic processes. In some, because language shapes our interactions, it is undoubtedly a valuable ally in the pursuit of sustainability. In some, I would add that it is through the language lens that individuals and communities of practice are able to talk about and reflect on the core concept of sustainability. For Bastardas Boada, sustainability clearly comes from the tradition of thinking that criticizes a perspective of economic development that overlooks almost totally the natural environment, the precise context where this development takes place, and which thus leads to a final and an unsustainable end devoid of resources and clearly harmful for the life of human beings. Bastarda Boada continues and adds that certain academic and activist enclaves have opposed the perspective of sustainable development or lasting development. They have theorized and constructed and begun to practice an economic and urbanistic development respectful of, integrated into, and in keeping with the dynamics of nature. In his view, such action provides a way of improving some of the material aspects of human life, while at the same time not damaging other environmental aspects, still more necessary and fundamental for the quality and even for the simple possibility of human existence. It does not renounce material and economic improvement, but nor does it exclude a fully healthy environment that is appropriate for the continuation of the species. Although language is not mentioned in the Sustainable Development Goals, nor was it seriously considered as an important dimension of social and economic development in the UN planning process that preceded them, language is a sine qua non condition and hence indispensable for the discussion of sustainability and climate change. Language is the main vehicle for communicating about innovative solutions for a sustainable world and for coming up with the response strategies to the climate crisis. I continue and I argue that language is indeed a cross-cutting issue in the intersection of a variety of disciplines and fields of study. It is through language that the marginalized voices of the people in the global south as well can be heard, and that discourse of and narratives of inequality come to the front. Language is indeed a powerful tool for environmental advocacy and activism. It is a fundamental tool for raising awareness about risks and in finding solutions to the world's environmental well-being. I continue and say that we shouldn't really underestimate the role of language for and in the discussion about sustainability. It's an effective means of communication in diverse languages. It's essential for reaching a broader audience, involving local communities, making the voices of these communities heard, and in respecting diverse perspectives to ensure sustainability. In other words, when we talk about the key role that language plays in sustainability, we should not underestimate also those languages that are non-official languages of the various countries. The Global Climate Risk Index, which analyzes the extent to which countries and regions have been affected by impacts of weather-related loss events. I'm talking about storms, floods, heat waves, etc. The human impacts, I'm talking here about fatalities and direct economic losses of climate change, indicates that Mozambique, the country where I am from, is among the most affected countries and territories in the world. We can see from this map the position, the location of Mozambique down south in Africa, and it is one of the most affected countries by climate change, affected by worse weather events. We're talking about floods, cyclones, droughts, etc., etc. So the Global Climate Risk Index concludes that less developed countries, such as Mozambique, are generally more affected than industrialized countries. Although Africa is the least polluting or carbon emitting continent, it is still one of the most severely affected by the climate crisis. Women, children, and the poorest communities are among the most vulnerable groups and are those that suffer the most the effects of global warming. In relation to the future climate change, the climate risk index may serve as a red flag and an alert for already existing vulnerability that may further increase in regions where extreme events will become more frequent or more severe due to climate change. In the case of Mozambique, vulnerability may increase also as a result of the rapidly escalating military conflict in the northern part of the country, the internal displacement resulting thereof, increasing food insecurity, apologies, and hence a humanitarian crisis, as well as ongoing post-electoral civil unrest. Although countries in the African continent, I'm talking about Latin American as well, the Caribbean, Asian, Oceanian, all those countries located in the global south are heavily impacted by climate change. They have historically had low rates of greenhouse gas emissions. In addition, very rarely the voices of people in these regions are heard. As such, I argue that the discussion of sustainability urgently needs to take into account the views, perceptions, and voices of the people of the South and specific vulnerabilities of these regions. Data from NASA indicate that the planet's average surface temperature has risen about 1 degree Celsius since the late 19th century. The atmosphere and oceans have warmed, the amount of snow and ice has diminished, and sea levels have risen globally. A change largely driven by increased carbon dioxide emissions into the atmosphere and other human activities. The Human Development Report suggests that the causes of global warming are related to human economic activities, releasing enormous amounts of greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere, thus contributing to climate change. However, when talking about how human responsibility in inducing climate change, it is very important to be aware of the different historical contributions of every country and region to today's greenhouse gas emissions. It is argued that while the most affluent, the richer countries of the world in the global north are responsible for around half of all emissions since the Industrial Revolution, as estimated by the World Inequality Database, and the global north produces a carbon footprint 100 times greater than that of the world's poor nations combined. The least developed countries in the global south appear to have contributed far less to global warming. In 2019, for instance, the top 10% of global emitters were responsible for about 48% of global CO2 emissions, while the bottom 50% were responsible for almost 12% of all emissions. It means that least developed countries have had a less equal share in the direct benefits of fossil fuel use, including energy consumption. Because language is a repository of traditional knowledge, and as such, indigenous languages can carry deep connections to the natural world with specific terms and concepts related to local ecosystems, biodiversity, and sustainability practices. A discussion of the issue of sustainability requires the use of languages other than the official languages of the countries in the global south, so as to retrieve and prevent the erosion of traditional ecological knowledge. In the case of multilingual Mozambique, where more than 20 languages are spoken, and Portuguese is the only official language, and also in the case of other countries in sub-Saharan Africa, most of which have a modern European language, either English or French as their official language, but lots of other native indigenous languages. I believe that environmental education, policy making, sustainable practices, and sustainability initiatives must adopt a linguistically inclusive approach to result in effective communication in national, local, indigenous, minority languages, which appear crucial for community engagement and education, as well as for successful implementation of sustainable development initiatives. As argued by Banks, people will and cannot be involved and being engaged and be proactive and cannot advocate for what they do not understand. So the issue of language is crucial to talk about climate change. People in the global south must be empowered to talk about climate activism, justice, and sustainability in a language or in a variety of languages that they understand and communicate. A concluding remark is that because sustainability requires collective action, multi-stakeholder engagement is called upon. The leadership, the youths, the most impacted communities, the academic community, and others. And this can only be possible through the use of the language and all languages that are spoken and understood by all groups. I finish my presentation by leaving you with a number of takeaways, questions for consideration, questions for further reflection. And one of them is how does social linguistics contribute to understanding and addressing sustainability and climate change? Here you need to consider the relationship between language, society, and sustainable practices. The second question is, why is it important to use local and indigenous languages in discussions and initiatives around sustainability in the global south? You have to think here about how language connects to traditional knowledge and community engagement. My question 3 has to do with what are some of the key vulnerabilities faced, for instance, by Mozambique and other global south countries in the context of climate change. We have to reflect on the role of historical contributions to emissions and the current impacts that we have been observing. My question 4 considers why is it essential to incorporate linguistic diversity in implementing the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. We have to focus here on the connection between effective communication and achieving sustainability goals. And finally, my question 5 is about what role does language play in empowering communities to participate in climate activism and sustainable efforts. Here we have to consider the significance of understanding and advocating for sustainable practices in one's own language. And I will stop here. I hope that this lecture made some sense or will help you reflect on the fact that language cannot be excluded from the sustainability debate. Thank you very much for your attention.